A flight attendant threw trash on a black baby, unaware he was the grandson of the vice president. You must join our channel and hit subscribe, because only those who believe no black child should ever be treated with disrespect will do it before this story begins. The sound of the airplane's engines hummed through the cabin, a low and steady vibration that seemed to match the rhythmic beat of Malik's heart. 11 years old, Malik sat with his mother, gripping the small snack tray she had handed him before takeoff. His fingers, still small and delicate, wrapped around the edges of the plastic, feeling the familiar texture. His eyes darted around the first-class cabin, noting the mix of business people in sharp suits, some with their faces buried in the glow of their phones, others staring out the window with distant expressions. He didn't belong here, not in the eyes of the others. They didn't know him, and he didn't know them, but Malik had learned early in life to sense the subtle shifts in the air, small movements that spoke louder than words. His mother sat beside him, a calming presence in the otherwise tense space, as she adjusted the seatbelt on her lap. Malik smiled up at her, but his mind wandered, his thoughts flicking from one thing to the next, unsettled. It had been a long time since he had seen his grandfather, Robert Darius, and this trip was supposed to be a simple visit. What he didn't know, however, was that this flight, this very moment, would forever alter the course of his life, setting off a chain of events that no one, especially not him, could have predicted. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, a blur of crisp uniforms and practiced smiles. They carried the weight of their roles as caretakers of the passengers' comfort, as if their presence could smooth over any tension. But as they passed from row to row, they masked the brewing storm that was about to hit. Greg Talbot, one of the attendants, moved closer to Malik's seat. His gaze fell upon the boy, and for a split second, Malik felt it, the weight of judgment, the coldness of a man who had already decided something about him before he even spoke. Greg's eyes narrowed as he looked Malik over, his sharp gaze flicking from the child's innocent face to the calm, everyday clothing he wore. A glance was all it took for Greg to form an opinion. "You don't belong here, kid," Greg said suddenly, his voice carrying more than just words. It was thick with contempt. "Just got lucky getting on first class." Malik's brow furrowed in confusion. The words didn't quite make sense to him, and yet they hit him harder than he would ever admit. His small hand instinctively tightened around the snack tray, a subtle defense mechanism. He didn't say anything, just stared at the attendant who had now turned to continue down the aisle. Greg didn't even wait for a response, his back already turned, his harsh words lingering in the air like smoke that wouldn't disperse. The other passengers, some of whom had been watching, seemed frozen in place. No one spoke up. No one challenged the attendant as if Malik's discomfort was invisible. Malik didn't move. He didn't react. His mind was already processing the moment, trying to understand what had just happened. His confusion turned into something deeper, something quiet and determined. A promise, though unspoken, began to form in the back of his mind. He wouldn't forget this moment. He wouldn't forget the humiliation, the sting of someone thinking he didn't deserve to be where he was. The thing about Malik was that he wasn't like other kids his age. His grandfather, Robert Darius, had always taught him that the world wasn't fair, but it was his responsibility to make things right when he saw injustice. What Malik didn't know was that this simple encounter, this brief exchange, would set off a chain of events beyond his control. Greg Talbot, still blissfully unaware of the storm he had just set in motion, moved down the aisle, his footsteps growing quieter as he disappeared into the galley. Meanwhile, Malik's mind was already racing, processing the injustice he had just encountered. It wasn't about the words or the trash that had been casually discarded on his tray. It wasn't even about the humiliation. It was about something deeper, something that Malik couldn't yet articulate. He didn't belong, Greg had said, but Malik knew better. His grandfather wasn't just any businessman. Robert Darius was the vice president of Bravestone International, a powerful corporation that held sway over politics, finance, and even military matters. Robert Darius was a name known to people in high places, and that was something Malik had learned to keep close to his chest. He hadn't been raised to brag about who he was, but he knew his grandfather's influence was vast. More than just money, more than just power. Robert Darius had a reach that few could even fathom, and now that reach was about to extend to the airline where Greg Talbot worked. As Malik's mind began to form the quiet resolve, he couldn't have known the ripple effect his silence would have. He didn't know that his grandfather's extensive network of influence would soon learn about what had happened on this flight. But as the plane soared through the clouds, Malik felt the weight of the moment settle over him. His confusion had turned into something sharper, something that would not be ignored. Greg's words would not go unanswered. Malik's confusion turned into a quiet determination, unaware of the storm gathering. The sound of the airplane's hum seemed to fade into the background as Malik's eyes followed the movements of the crew from his seat. The world around him felt strangely quiet, save for the occasional murmur from the passengers and the rustling of snack bags. He couldn't shake the sting of Greg's words from earlier. Every time Malik closed his eyes, he saw the image of the flight attendant's cold sneer, a look that seemed to mock him for simply existing in this space. The first-class cabin, with its plush seats and rich decor, felt like an alien world to Malik, a boy who wasn't used to luxury or the attention it brought. But this wasn't about the luxury. It was about the way Greg had looked at him, like he didn't belong, like he was out of place. Malik's hands gripped the armrests and he inhaled deeply, forcing himself to calm down. His grandfather always said, "Patience is power." Malik had learned that lesson well, though today it felt like the test of a lifetime. He shifted in his seat, trying to find a more comfortable position. His mother, beside him, was still lost in a book, oblivious to the tension simmering beneath Malik's surface. The other passengers, mostly quiet and absorbed in their own worlds, remained unaware of the undercurrent of hostility Malik felt creeping closer. His gaze moved to the galley where Greg stood, watching him. That sneer had returned, colder than before. There was no mistaking it now. Greg was looking for an opportunity, an opening to unleash whatever bitterness had been brewing inside him. Malik stiffened but kept his face neutral. His heart raced, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he focused on his breath, determined to stay in control. Then, without warning, Greg stepped into the aisle and walked toward him. The passengers shifted in their seats, some unaware, others sensing something was about to happen. Malik's body tensed in anticipation, his eyes never leaving Greg's as he drew closer. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers, the silent witnesses who were too scared to intervene. There was nowhere to escape, no way to retreat. Greg arrived at Malik's side, standing over him like a towering figure. The man's eyes gleamed with something malicious, a sense of satisfaction in the cruelty he was about to unleash. Greg's hand came down, a cup of water in his grip. Without a word, he tipped it, sending the cool liquid spilling across Malik's lap. The coldness of it shocked him, but he didn't move. Before Malik could process what had happened, Greg flung a handful of trash onto his tray, each piece a cruel reminder of the words that had been spat at him earlier. "You don't belong here with the rich folk," Greg muttered, his voice low and venomous, dripping with contempt. "A kid like you doesn't deserve first class." The words cut deep, but it was the act itself that left Malik frozen. His hands clenched into fists, but he did not make a sound. He could feel the heat rise in his chest, but his calm exterior remained intact. He refused to give Greg the satisfaction of seeing his anger. Instead, his eyes narrowed, locking with Greg's, a silent promise forming between them. This would not go unanswered. Greg, satisfied with the humiliation he'd just inflicted, turned on his heel, walking away with a smirk on his face. Malik's body remained still, but his mind was already racing. The trash lay in front of him, scattered across the tray in a twisted mockery of the meal he was supposed to enjoy. Yet, it wasn't the mess that consumed him. It was the injustice, the deliberate cruelty of it all. His chest tightened, but he refused to let his emotions control him. He had been humiliated, yes, but that humiliation wouldn't define him. Not today. Not ever. Malik glanced around, feeling the weight of the other passengers' stares, some fearful, some sympathetic. They had all seen what happened, but no one spoke up. No one moved to intervene. He could feel their eyes on him, but their inaction only strengthened his resolve. "You know," Derek said, his tone shifting slightly, "there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye." He glanced over at Malik's mother, still unaware, then back at the boy. "You want to talk about it?" Malik hesitated, his mind racing. The flight attendants, standing off to the side, were unsure of what to do. None of them had expected this, none of them had prepared for it. The tension in the cabin was palpable, like the calm before a storm. But Greg had walked away, his cruelty unchecked, and Malik remained in the center of the storm, calm on the outside, but a fire building inside. The silence stretched on as the minutes passed. Malik's mind worked quickly, methodically. He couldn't let this slide. He couldn't let Greg or anyone else think that this behavior would go unchallenged. His hand moved slowly, almost mechanically, as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers trembled for a moment before he steadied them, focusing on capturing the evidence, documenting every detail of the moment: the spilled water, the discarded trash, the words that had been thrown at him. This wasn't just about getting back at Greg. This was bigger. He could feel it deep inside, a sense of purpose taking root. He didn't know exactly how this would unfold, but he knew it wasn't just about him. It was about making sure no one else had to endure this kind of treatment. Malik didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes conveyed a message that no one could ignore. He would get justice, even if it meant tearing down the systems that had allowed this kind of behavior to thrive. He would fight, not with violence, but with the quiet strength that had always been his greatest weapon. The trash lay in front of Malik, but his quiet resolve was stronger than ever. Malik's fingers trembled as he gripped his phone, the cold metal of the device cutting into his palm. He had never felt so small in his life, yet in this moment he felt the weight of something far larger than his 11 years. The words from Greg, the flight attendant, echoed in his mind. "You don't belong here, kid. Just got lucky getting on first class." The trash, the cruel words, the flick of disdain in the man's eyes, it all mingled together, creating a storm inside Malik that was both confusing and sharp. His hands worked quickly, snapping pictures of the mess in front of him: the cup of spilled water, the remnants of the discarded trash, and the tiny details that seemed insignificant to others but were everything to him. He had learned early on that sometimes the truth wasn't found in the loudest voices, but in the smallest things, the things people overlooked. His mother, walking a few steps ahead, didn't notice the shift in her son. She had been too absorbed in the quiet buzz of the terminal, her mind on the trip ahead. She was the one who always seemed calm, steady, while Malik often held things inside. As they moved through the crowd, Malik kept his eyes focused on the floor, avoiding the curious glances of others. He could feel their eyes on him, the whispers rising, and though he tried to tune it out, the words stuck to him like a shadow. The low murmur of the crowd washed over him as they neared the security checkpoint, but Malik's focus didn't waver. He could feel the tension coiling inside of him, a quiet promise to himself that this wouldn't be forgotten, that he wouldn't let this moment slip away without action. He didn't know what he would do, but he knew he had to do something. As his fingers swiped the screen, capturing every detail, he suddenly felt a presence behind him. "Excuse me, son," a voice called, low but firm. Malik didn't need to turn around to recognize the voice of Derek Trent, the security officer. Malik had seen the man a few times in the airport, always standing at attention near the gates, his uniform crisp and his demeanor unshakable. But today, something in Derek's eyes was different. It wasn't just the usual cold professionalism, there was something else, something deeper. Malik felt a shiver run through him, but he didn't flinch. "You okay?" Derek asked, his voice softening slightly as he caught sight of the phone in Malik's hand. The security officer glanced at Malik's mother, who seemed unaware of the growing storm around them. "I'm fine," Malik muttered, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "Just documenting something." Derek paused for a moment, studying the boy before him. His instincts, honed over years in security, told him this wasn't just some petty complaint. There was something about Malik, something about the way he held himself, that felt different. It wasn't just the incident with the flight attendant. Derek knew it was more than that. Something bigger was at play here. He wasn't sure how much he could trust this man, but something in Derek's eyes told him he wasn't just another person who would turn away when things got tough. He shook his head slowly, trying to maintain his composure. "Number. But I have to do something. I have to make sure it's known." Derek nodded, his gaze flicking to the phone in Malik's hand. "You're doing the right thing." There was a pause before Derek added, his voice barely above a murmur. "Just know, there's more going on than you realize. This thing, it's bigger than just a bad flight. Your grandfather, he's not going to let this slide." Malik's eyes widened slightly, but before he could respond, Derek turned and gestured for them to follow him through the security gates. The world around Malik seemed to slow as he processed Derek's words. He had no idea what Derek meant, but something in the man's voice made him feel like this was just the beginning of something much larger. As they made their way through the terminal, Malik's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had thought his fight was just against one man, one cruel flight attendant who had crossed a line. But now, he felt the weight of something far greater. His grandfather, Robert Darius, was a man with power, influence, and a network that reached further than Malik could ever imagine. The idea that this incident might have already caught the attention of people who could make a difference both scared and empowered him. He looked at his phone again, staring at the images he had taken. His young hands, which had only been used to playing video games and taking selfies, had just documented an injustice, a moment frozen in time. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He didn't know what was coming next, but he was ready. Malik's resolve had only solidified. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. He wasn't just going to be the victim of some random encounter, he was going to make sure the world saw the truth. The wheels of fate began turning, unseen but inevitable. The tension in the air was thick as Malik and his mother made their way through the bustling airport terminal, escorted by Derek Trent. The sound of their footsteps was a muted rhythm against the murmur of other travelers. Malik's thoughts, however, were far from the hum of activity around him. He was still haunted by the image of Greg's sneer, the cruel words he'd hurled at him, and the stinging humiliation that had followed. His mind raced, replaying the moment over and over again as they walked through the terminal. Despite Derek's attempts at small talk, offering reassuring words and quiet pleasantries, Malik's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't escape the words that Greg had spoken, nor the image of the trash dumped on his tray, the insult heavier than any weight he'd ever felt. Derek, aware of the emotional weight that pressed down on the boy, glanced at him with a mix of sympathy and concern. He had seen this type of thing before, children who were forced to grow up too fast, who learned early that the world wasn't always fair. But Malik was different. The boy had an unspoken strength, a quiet fire that Derek knew could one day burn bright if given the right spark. He kept his distance, offering only occasional glances and the faintest of smiles, understanding that the situation was too serious for small distractions. As they reached the lounge, Malik's gaze remained distant, locked on a world only he seemed to understand. His mother, walking beside him, noticed the change in him. She had seen Malik quiet before, but this was different. His silence now wasn't the usual calm he carried with him. It was something colder, deeper, but she knew better than to push. Malik was a boy of few words, but when he spoke, it was with purpose. Derek escorted them to the lounge, then hesitated before speaking again. "Malik, I know this is hard, but it'll get better," he said softly, watching as the boy didn't react, his eyes fixed ahead. Derek could sense that this wasn't just about the flight attendant's cruel treatment. It was something deeper, something that was awakening inside Malik. The desire for justice was taking root, and it would not be easily extinguished. Meanwhile, back at the airline's corporate headquarters, the scene was vastly different. CEO Jeffrey Ward sat behind his sleek, polished desk, the soft glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows in the room. The quiet hum of the office surrounded him as he scrolled through reports, but his focus was interrupted when an urgent email came through, one that would change the course of the day. It was from Robert Darius's legal team. He paused, staring at the document, his fingers hovering over the mouse. The words on the screen were clear. A lawsuit. He skimmed through the message quickly, his eyes narrowing as he read the specifics. This wasn't a minor incident. This was serious. The weight of the words hit him like a cold rush of air. Robert Darius was a name that commanded respect and fear in corporate and political circles. His reach extended far beyond the visible. Jeffrey's heart sank as he realized the full scope of the situation. This wasn't just a complaint, it was a challenge. A challenge he was ill-equipped to handle, at least not without serious consequences. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples, trying to steady his racing thoughts. His mind raced through options, but all roads led to the same conclusion. There was no way out of this without facing the storm head-on. Unaware of the impending storm, Greg continued his day as if nothing had happened. He moved through the airport with a sense of casual indifference, oblivious to the ripple effect his actions had caused. He had no idea that the chain of events he had set in motion was already gathering speed, nor that his life was about to be irreparably changed. His dismissal from the airline would come swiftly, but it wouldn't be the end of his consequences. It would be the beginning. Malik, on the other hand, was no longer the passive child who had once quietly accepted the world around him. He had crossed a threshold. The injustice he had faced stirred something within him, and it was more than just a desire for personal revenge. It was the beginning of something much larger. He didn't need to speak. His silence spoke volumes. His focus was now laser-sharp, his determination stronger than ever. He had already begun to plan, though his methods were still unknown. The need for justice burned quietly within him, but it was there, waiting to ignite. Derek glanced at Malik once more before stepping away, understanding the depth of the change in him. The young boy, once an observer, had now become an active participant in the unfolding events. He was no longer just a victim of circumstance. He was a force in the making. Derek couldn't help but wonder what Malik would become as the story played out. Greg remained blissfully unaware of the storm about to hit. The chaos erupted the moment the story broke. Malik's name spread like wildfire across the digital world, amplified by hashtags, shares, and posts. Justice. For Malik became a battle cry, one that resonated with people from all walks of life, uniting them under a common cause. The internet buzzed with outrage, and the more the story spread, the more intense the public outcry became. It didn't matter who Malik was or where he came from. The injustice he faced on that flight struck a chord with everyone. The footage of the incident, caught on camera by several passengers, quickly circulated, showing Greg Talbot's deliberate cruelty as he mocked a child, throwing trash on his tray in front of the entire cabin. His actions were irrefutable, but that didn't stop the world from demanding an explanation. The media coverage was relentless. News outlets, both local and national, interviewed the witnesses, and each account painted Greg as a villain. His sneering words, his disrespectful attitude, and his complete disregard for any form of decency shone through in every interview. People were disgusted, angry, and they weren't going to forget. The public was furious, not just with Greg, but with the system that allowed such behavior to thrive unchecked. The airline, already known for its reputation for luxury, had its image shattered. Every news broadcast showed the same footage: Greg spilling the water, tossing trash on Malik's tray, and making his degrading remarks. It was a direct assault on not just a child, but on everything the airline claimed to stand for. In the midst of this media storm, Robert Darius moved swiftly. His influence was vast, but this wasn't about using power for personal gain. It was about ensuring that Malik's dignity was restored. Robert pulled every string he could, making sure that the footage from the flight was released. The video spread quickly, and its impact was undeniable. Public opinion swung wildly against the airline, with passengers, commentators, and even employees sharing their disbelief at Greg's actions. The more they saw, the angrier they became. Days later, Robert Darius appeared on national television in a rare public interview. The moment his face appeared on the screen, people knew something significant was about to unfold. Dressed in a dark suit that matched the severity of his words, Robert spoke directly to the camera, his voice calm but firm. "There must be accountability," he said. "Respect for all people, regardless of who they are, must be the standard, not the exception." His gaze was unflinching, and the weight of his words resonated with viewers. The media, which had already been saturated with the story, now had Robert's authoritative voice on the matter. His position as one of the most influential figures in the world gave him the credibility to make this a global issue. But for Malik, it wasn't enough. Greg's termination from the airline was only a small part of the justice he sought. The firing was necessary, yes, but it was only the surface of a much deeper, systemic problem. Greg was just one symptom of a much larger issue, a culture of elitism, racism, and inequality that ran deep within the airline. Malik had been treated with disdain because of who he was, and he couldn't ignore the fact that this wasn't an isolated incident. He was a child, but his mind was sharp. He understood that Greg's actions were part of a system that had to be changed. His desire for justice went beyond retribution. It was about dismantling the very systems that allowed people like Greg to flourish. Malik's quiet determination became a driving force that pushed him forward, even in the face of overwhelming odds. His journey was no longer just about him. It was about challenging an entire industry that had shown, time and again, that it was willing to tolerate discrimination for the sake of profit and status. Greg, now at the center of a media firestorm, had no idea what he had unleashed. His smugness, his disregard for others, had now become a part of a larger, unstoppable force. And as the airline scrambled to salvage its reputation, Malik wasn't satisfied with just Greg's firing. He wanted more. He wanted the world to see the truth, that this wasn't just about one flight attendant's cruelty, but about a culture that needed to be uprooted. The battle wasn't over, and Malik's thirst for justice had only just begun. The incident had been a momentary lapse in judgment by Greg Talbot, but its repercussions would echo through the halls of Heirloom Airlines like a ticking time bomb. The plane had landed, and the world around Malik had returned to its normal rhythm. Yet his world, the world of privilege, power, and untold wealth, had shifted forever. Greg, smug and unaware, had dismissed the young boy, treating him as nothing more than a nuisance in his domain of luxury. But Robert Darius, Malik's grandfather, was not a man who could be brushed aside so easily. When the details of the confrontation reached him, Robert didn't simply react with the anger one might expect from a man defending his family. No, Robert Darius was a strategist, and this was a war of principles. The firestorm had begun, and now it was Robert's turn to fan the flames. He had always known that his influence wasn't just in the political circles or the halls of finance. It extended far deeper. The years spent building his empire had not only made him wealthy, but had also placed him in positions where his power could bend the world to his will. "Get me Samuel Blackwell," Robert barked into the phone as he paced his opulent office. His eyes were sharp, focused on the task at hand. Samuel had been with him for years, a trusted advisor who had helped him navigate countless corporate battles. If anyone could orchestrate the complete overhaul that was needed, it was him. "We need to move fast." Within hours, Samuel had presented the plan, an intricate web of corporate strategy designed to uproot the systemic bias festering within the airline. The airline's culture had long been toxic, rooted in classism and elitism, hidden beneath its shiny surface. Greg was only a small part of the issue, a man too blinded by arrogance to see the larger problem he represented. Samuel's plan was clear: a full investigation into the airline's practices, the firing of every employee who had exhibited discriminatory behavior, and a restructuring of the company from top to bottom. Robert's hand hovered over the decision to release the legal papers to the board of directors. He had known this moment would come. It had been building for years, this quiet resentment of the system that privileged only the few. Greg, the unwitting pawn, would soon become expendable. But the fight, Robert knew, wasn't just about one man, it was about bringing down the entire corrupt system. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, calls, and legal maneuvers. Every detail was scrutinized. Every witness was interviewed. But it wasn't just the legal team working on this. Robert had put his most trusted people into action. His business contacts were notified, and within a matter of days, the whispers began. The media caught wind of what was happening, and soon the hashtag number Justice for Malik became a rallying cry. Social media exploded with stories, and news outlets were flooded with calls. Malik, the quiet child who had been wronged, was now becoming a symbol of resistance against an industry built on exclusion and elitism. In the boardroom of Aeroloom, the situation began to spiral out of control. CEO Jeffrey Ward had been informed of the incident, but his dismissive attitude toward it now seemed foolish. He was accustomed to handling problems with a simple press release or a quiet apology, but this was different. Robert Darius wasn't a man who could be pacified with empty words. The pressure from the public was mounting, and Ward knew that a reckoning was coming, but nothing could prepare him for the reality of the situation. The legal documents arrived on his desk like an avalanche. Robert had made his move, and there was no going back. Greg, the man who had started this chain of events, continued his day obliviously. He had been removed from his duties, but he didn't yet understand the magnitude of what was happening. To him, the incident had been a fleeting moment, nothing more than a trivial interaction. He hadn't realized that he was a small cog in a much larger machine, a machine that was about to grind him down. Meanwhile, Malik sat quietly, his resolve hardening with every passing day. He had never sought revenge. He had only wanted justice, but now, as the media storm raged around him, he realized something more important. His fight wasn't just about the insult hurled at him on the plane. It was about something much bigger, something that reached far beyond the walls of Aeroloom Airlines. Malik's quiet resolve had become a beacon for others who had suffered in silence, and he would not let that opportunity slip away. The confrontation with Greg had been just the beginning, but now the stakes had grown exponentially. Robert Darius had set a plan in motion that would not only bring Greg to justice but would challenge the very foundation of an entire industry. Aeroloom Airlines, once an untouchable giant, was now facing the consequences of its actions. Greg's termination was but a piece in a much bigger game. The tension in the air was palpable, the weight of Malik's quiet resolve pressing down on every inch of the airline's crumbling reputation. The incident on the plane had already sparked outrage, but Robert Darius knew this was just the beginning. The media had latched onto the story with the tenacity of a bloodhound, digging into every aspect of the airline's operations, its history of discriminatory practices, and its tangled relationships with powerful figures in both business and politics. Headlines screamed injustice, fueled by the story of a young boy wronged in the most public of ways. But Robert wasn't satisfied with the public outcry or the CEO's half-hearted apology. No, he knew that real change would require more than a few words. It would take action, action that would expose the very rot at the heart of the airline. Malik, despite being thrust into the center of this media storm, stayed as silent as ever. His quiet demeanor, usually a source of comfort, now became his weapon. The anger that simmered inside him no longer needed to be vocalized. It wasn't revenge he sought. Revenge would only fuel the fire of the system that had wronged him. It was justice, something deeper and more enduring than petty retribution. He wanted no other child, no other person, to feel the sting of discrimination the way he had. So, while the world was preoccupied with the headlines and the scandal, Malik remained grounded in his purpose, driven by a quiet determination that no one could fully understand. In the midst of all this, the airline was under immense pressure to act. Public apologies were made, but they rang hollow. The damage had been done, and no amount of remorse could erase the years of discrimination that had shaped the company's culture. Robert knew this all too well, and he wasn't fooled by the superficial attempts at reform. He needed something more, a way to uproot the toxic culture that had allowed people like Greg Talbot to thrive. That's when Derek Trent, the security officer who had first escorted Malik and his mother through the airport, became an unexpected ally. Derek had seen the injustice firsthand. He had witnessed the events unfold, had seen the cold sneer on Greg's face as he made his comments, and had recognized the signs of something far more insidious beneath the surface. What had started as a quiet act of support for Malik soon transformed into something more profound. Derek began his own investigation into the airline's internal practices, uncovering a disturbing pattern of discriminatory actions, unethical behavior, and hidden reports that painted a grim picture of the company's operations. The evidence he gathered was damning. Communications between high-ranking employees, internal memos, and confidential reports detailing instances of discrimination that had been swept under the rug for years. When Derek finally approached Malik's family with the evidence, it was as if a light had been turned on in a dark room. This was the moment that would change everything. If that moment made your blood boil and your heart ache, don't stay silent. Subscribe and become a member, because standing up to hate is how we fight back. With the evidence in hand, Robert Darius made a move that shocked the entire corporate world. The tension that had simmered beneath the surface for so long was now boiling over, and Robert was not about to back down. He had collected the damning footage, the witness accounts, and the internal communications that exposed the deep-rooted culture of elitism and discrimination at the airline. But instead of settling for a quick legal victory or a mere settlement, Robert chose to expose it all. His decision to initiate a full-scale investigation into the airline's practices was a game-changer, one that would send shockwaves throughout the industry. The news spread quickly. The basic details of the incident, the cruel treatment of Malik by Greg, the flight attendant, had already been made public, but now Robert was ready to dig deeper. His legal team worked tirelessly, filing lawsuits that accused the airline of fostering a climate of discrimination and exclusion. The lawsuit wasn't just about the one incident. It was about a much larger pattern, one that had been ignored for years by the very executives who now found themselves in the crosshairs. The board members, the top executives, men who had long turned a blind eye to the mistreatment of passengers who didn't fit their idea of who belonged, now found themselves facing a reckoning. Behind closed doors, meetings took place with increasing frequency, the air heavy with anxiety and uncertainty. Lawyers and corporate advisors scrambled to limit the fallout, proposing quick fixes and damage control measures, hoping to quell the growing storm. But Robert wasn't interested in compromise. His objective was clear: systemic reform. He wasn't simply seeking retribution for his grandson. He was determined to dismantle a company that had allowed such actions to take place unchecked, a company that had built its wealth on exclusion and bias. The pressure on the airline's CEO, Jeffrey Ward, was mounting. Robert's demands were only growing more forceful, and as the days passed, Ward found himself cornered on all fronts. The media was relentless, with investigative journalists unearthing every last detail of the airline's internal practices. Meanwhile, Robert's team of legal experts meticulously pieced together the case against the airline. It was no longer just about Greg. It was about an entire system of corporate corruption that Robert intended to expose. Jeffrey Ward, once a figurehead of power within the company, now found himself facing the consequences of years of negligence. The legal documents arrived at his desk like a thunderclap, the weight of them settling into the pit of his stomach. His hands trembled as he read through them, knowing that his position was becoming increasingly untenable. The media storm was unavoidable, and the board members were losing patience with his attempts at damage control. The phone calls and meetings were endless, each one another reminder that his time was running out. The backlash was swift. News outlets had picked up the story of Malik's mistreatment in first class, but the real turning point came when the hashtag number Justice for Malik spread like wildfire across social media. At first, it seemed like a typical online uproar, fleeting and easily forgotten. But this time, something was different. People didn't just rally behind a single injustice. They saw it as a symbol of the inequality and discrimination ingrained in industries far beyond aviation. Malik's name became synonymous with resilience and justice. His face, calm yet unwavering, was plastered across news stations, newspapers, and every social media platform. Malik, though still a quiet child, had become a figure that many in the public admired. His ability to remain composed in the face of Greg's cruelty was perceived as strength, not weakness. The media were quick to paint him as a victim of the system, but what they didn't realize was that he had become so much more. He wasn't just the boy wronged on an airplane. He was the face of a revolution. His eyes, steady and firm, showed a maturity beyond his years, as if he was destined for something greater than any of them could have anticipated. Robert Darius watched it all unfold from his office. The media frenzy, the uproar from the public, the subtle shift in power, it was exactly what he needed. From the moment he had seen his grandson's dignity tested by Greg, Robert knew that the moment for change had come. But he didn't just want to settle for Greg's firing or a token apology. No, Robert's vision was far larger. He wanted to tear down the system that allowed people like Greg to flourish. The first phase of his plan was simple: use the media to control the narrative. Robert had long known the power of a well-executed media campaign. His connections, built over decades, gave him the ability to reach the very core of the corporate and political world. But it wasn't just about media control. It was about sending a message to the people. The message was clear: accountability and transparency. Every corporate giant, every executive that had ever shielded inequality under the guise of success would now have to answer to the public. Robert didn't just want to dismantle the airline. He wanted to break the chains of elitism that held industries hostage. He wanted to make sure that every business, every entity that catered to the rich and powerful, was forced to answer for its actions. His eyes, always sharp and calculating, focused on the task ahead. With the media firmly in his grasp, Robert took his campaign further, pushing his message of systemic reform to every corner of society. Companies, even those outside the airline industry, began to take notice. They knew that Robert Darius was a man of influence, and they understood that his crusade for justice wouldn't stop at one airline. They saw the shifting tides and understood that if they didn't take action, they could easily be the next target of his campaign. Meanwhile, Malik's transformation from a silent observer to a symbol of the people was unfolding in real time. In interviews, he spoke little, letting his calm demeanor and stoic presence do the talking. His face told the story of a young boy who had been wronged but had found the courage to rise above it. Malik's silence spoke louder than words ever could. The pressure on Heirloom Airlines was mounting, and within the executive boardroom, the tension was palpable. The once powerful figures that had arrogantly dismissed Malik's ordeal were now scrambling for damage control. Jeffrey Ward, the CEO, paced the length of the room, his palms sweating. His trusted lieutenants sat at the large conference table, each one of them wearing expressions that ranged from worry to defeat. They had underestimated the storm they had unleashed by targeting a child. They had underestimated Robert Darius. Jeffrey's face was drawn tight with anxiety as he looked over the legal documents sprawled out before him. The lawsuit, the press coverage, the growing boycott, everything had spiraled out of control. He could almost hear the whispers that filled every corner of the corporate world, the ones that questioned his leadership and the integrity of the airline. The reputation that had once taken years to build was now crumbling faster than he could contain it. "Get me Ward," Robert's voice crackled through the phone as one of Jeffrey's aides relayed the call. The words seemed almost like a death knell for the beleaguered CEO. "Yes, Robert, Enough," Robert Darius interjected, his voice calm but laced with authority. "I'm not interested in your apologies. This is no longer just about Greg Talbot, and this is about your company's deep-rooted problems. It's time for real change, and not just a few cosmetic fixes to placate the public." The room fell silent as the weight of Robert's words settled on everyone. Jeffrey's stomach tightened. He could feel the walls closing in, his every move now calculated to save what was left of the company's honor. He wiped his brow, trying to maintain a semblance of composure. "We're prepared to make amends," he said, voice shaking slightly. "But this is not the way to handle it. We've been under attack. You've been under attack because you allowed the rot to fester, and now it's time to clean house." Robert cut him off, his tone unwavering. The words hit like a bombshell. Jeffrey had expected some form of concession, a negotiated settlement. Instead, Robert was demanding a complete overhaul, an independent committee to oversee every facet of the company's hiring, training, and customer service practices. The company's dirty secrets, the years of discrimination hidden behind polished marketing campaigns, were about to be laid bare for the world to see. "Don't think you can smooth this over with corporate negotiations or empty promises," Robert continued, the calm in his voice belying the intensity of his message. "I want a complete restructuring, and I will make sure the public sees every step of the process. This isn't about appeasing you, Jeffrey. This is about making sure the world knows who you are and what you stand for." Outside the room, the atmosphere in the corporate headquarters was charged with anticipation. Robert had anticipated every move the airline would try to make, every attempt at deception or deflection. His legal team, a finely honed machine, had already mapped out the company's next steps, prepared for whatever Jeffrey and his negotiators had planned. They knew how to play the game, and Robert had stacked the deck in his favor. Jeffrey knew he was cornered. The boardroom that had once been a fortress of influence now felt like a trap. His voice faltered as he stammered, "But we can." "No more games, Jeffrey," Robert interrupted. "You've made your last offer. Now it's my turn to make mine." It was a standoff, and Robert was in control. His eyes locked onto the CEO's, and in that moment it was clear who was the true power in the room. Jeffrey could feel his grip on the company slipping, the weight of the situation suffocating him. Robert was no longer just a businessman. He had become a force of nature, a juggernaut that could not be stopped. The negotiations that followed were nothing like the ones Jeffrey had expected. His team of corporate negotiators, once known for their ability to smooth over crises, now found themselves at a disadvantage. Robert's legal team and corporate advisors were well prepared, every move anticipated, every counterpoint ready to be shot down. Jeffrey and his team could only watch in silence as their carefully crafted arguments were dismantled one by one. "Every move you make, every concession you offer, is only a reaction to my strategy," Robert said coolly, standing at the head of the table, his voice calm and measured. "I've already won. You just don't know it yet." And with that, Robert Darius sealed his victory. The airline's corporate structure, once impenetrable and self-assured, was now in freefall, cornered by a man who had played the game better than anyone ever could have predicted. Robert's demands would not be met halfway. The airline would either comply with his terms or face the full weight of his influence and the public backlash that would inevitably follow. Jeffrey Ward sat back in his chair, his face pale, knowing that the company was now at Robert's mercy. The negotiations between Robert Darius and the airline's executives had been tense from the very start, but it wasn't until Robert revealed the final piece of his plan that the stakes truly became clear. The room was stifling, the air thick with tension as Robert, his face calm but his eyes steely with purpose, sat at the head of the table. His hands rested on the polished wood, fingers steepled in quiet contemplation. The executives, once so confident in their positions, shifted nervously in their seats, their eyes darting from Robert to each other. They were well aware of the man's business acumen, but they had underestimated his vision, the depth of his resolve. Jeffrey Ward, the CEO of the beleaguered airline, had spent years building the company into a powerhouse, but now, facing Robert's strategic brilliance, he felt the very ground beneath him shake. The airline had been under siege for weeks, battered by public outcry, legal challenges, and an unrelenting media storm. But this was different. Robert wasn't here to negotiate a settlement. He wasn't here to accept half measures. He had come to make a statement. "Gentlemen," Robert began, his voice low but steady, "I'm not here to continue playing this game. I'm here to change it." His eyes swept across the table, pausing momentarily on each face. "I'm starting a new airline." The words landed like a bombshell, and for a moment there was silence. Jeffrey's breath caught in his throat. He had heard whispers of Robert's dissatisfaction with the airline's leadership, but he hadn't expected this. A rival airline? It was a direct challenge to everything they had built. Robert leaned forward, his gaze unwavering as he continued. "This new airline will be more than just a business. It will be a movement," he said, his voice carrying a weight of authority. "We will prioritize diversity, fairness, and transparency in every aspect of our operation. We will offer equal opportunities to employees and customers alike, something your company has failed to do time and time again." The executives exchanged uneasy glances, but Robert could see the fear in their eyes. They had known power, they had known wealth, but they had never faced anything like this. This wasn't just a corporate move, it was a revolution in the making. Robert's eyes shifted to the side of the room, where a few of his closest allies stood, including his trusted advisor, Samuel Blackwell. Samuel nodded subtly, and Robert gave a slight nod in return. The groundwork had already been laid. Vanguard Air, Robert's new airline, was no longer a mere idea. It was on the brink of becoming a reality. The media, hungry for the next big story, had already picked up on the whispers surrounding the new airline. Within hours, the announcement spread across news outlets and social media. Investors, seeing the growing tide of support for Robert's vision, began to pull their backing from the airline that had wronged Malik and his family. One by one, they shifted their focus to Vanguard Air, choosing a future of equity and transparency over the tarnished reputation of the old airline. Greg, the flight attendant whose cruel actions had sparked this entire chain of events, was now a symbol of everything that was wrong with the airline industry. His face, once confident and brash, now appeared on news outlets as a cautionary tale, a man whose career had been destroyed by his own ignorance and malice. He had underestimated Malik, he had underestimated Robert, and now he was paying the price. In a quiet, dimly lit corner of the airport, Robert's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from one of his legal advisors. He looked down at the screen and smiled slightly as he read the message. It was clear now. The airline executives were scrambling, attempting to mitigate the damage, but Robert had already won. His new venture wasn't just a competing airline, it was a beacon of change in an industry that desperately needed it. The boardroom was quiet as Robert stood, signaling the end of the meeting. He walked toward the door, his movements deliberate, unhurried. Jeffrey Ward watched him leave, his mouth dry, the realization sinking in that the industry was shifting beneath his feet. He had thought he could contain Robert's influence, but now he saw that the man had already set the stage for something much bigger. Outside, Robert's car waited, sleek and black against the backdrop of the airport terminal. As he slid into the back seat, his mind raced with plans for the next steps. Vanguard Air would not only challenge the airline industry, it would remake it from the ground up. The industry trembled as Robert's new airline took shape. The doors to Vanguard Air's inaugural flight swung open, revealing the sleek, gleaming aircraft that represented not just a new airline, but a revolution. Robert Darius stood at the entrance, his calm yet powerful demeanor commanding the attention of every camera and every eye in the room. He wasn't just unveiling a new business, he was unveiling a new era in the airline industry, one that would prioritize fairness, respect, and transparency over the elitism and discrimination that had plagued the old guard. Beside him, Malik stood quietly, his presence unmistakable even in silence. The young boy, now a hero in the eyes of millions, was the face of the movement that had ignited this change. His grandfather's hand rested on his shoulder, the bond between them stronger than ever. Malik's once unshakable confidence had only grown in the wake of the airline's massive restructuring. As the cameras flashed, he offered no smile, no dramatic gestures, only a quiet, resolute strength that seemed to speak louder than any words could. Inside the hangar, the press eagerly gathered, snapping photos and recording every moment. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of what this new airline represented pressing down on the shoulders of those involved. The speeches were brief but impactful, each one highlighting the core values that Vanguard Air would uphold: accountability, fairness, and a commitment to serving all customers with the dignity they deserved. The crowd roared with approval as the flight crew, a diverse, highly trained team hand-picked for their skills and integrity, took their places. Malik's mind, however, wasn't focused on the crowd or the cameras. His thoughts drifted back to the words of the flight attendant, Greg, and the trash that had been thrown on his lap. He knew in the pit of his stomach that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. This airline, his grandfather's brainchild, was built to serve a new generation of travelers, one that would never again tolerate the abuse he had experienced. He could already feel the weight of responsibility on his young shoulders. This was bigger than just him. It was for all the children, all the passengers who had been overlooked, disrespected, and humiliated for far too long. The press conference concluded, and the first flight of Vanguard Air was ready for takeoff. As the plane taxied down the runway, a celebratory atmosphere filled the cabin. The crew moved with precision, ensuring that every detail was perfect. Outside, the world seemed to change in real time. The message was clear. Vanguard Air wasn't just about flying passengers from point A to point B. It was about restoring dignity to an industry long defined by wealth, status, and exclusivity. It was about leveling the playing field, and Malik knew that his grandfather's vision had only just begun to unfold. But just as the celebration reached its peak, Robert's phone buzzed. His expression darkened as he read the message. It was from his legal team, and it contained news that would turn the air in the room cold. A lawsuit had been filed by the very airline that had wronged Malik. The former airline's board, desperate to maintain their hold on the industry, was attempting to discredit Vanguard Air at every turn. They accused Robert of unfair business practices and collusion, trying to tear apart everything he had worked for in the blink of an eye. Malik's eyes narrowed as he saw the shift in his grandfather's demeanor. The celebrations seemed to lose their warmth in an instant. He had known it wouldn't be easy. The battle for the future of the industry had always been inevitable, but now it was real. The public had rallied behind Vanguard Air, but the old guard wasn't ready to relinquish their power without a fight. "Vanguard Air isn't going down without a fight," Robert muttered under his breath, his voice steady but tinged with resolve. His fingers gripped the phone, his mind already working through the next steps. This lawsuit wasn't just a legal challenge, it was a direct attack on everything he stood for. And if the former airline thought they could intimidate him, they were gravely mistaken. Robert had played the corporate game for years. He knew how to maneuver through its darkest corners. The first flight of Vanguard Air continued its course, but the weight of the situation settled over Robert like a storm cloud. His thoughts were already on the next phase, already planning the steps to ensure the airline's victory. There would be no compromise, no backing down. Vanguard Air would soar, no matter the obstacles in its path. The battle for the future of the industry had just begun. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the lawsuit filed by the former airline company hung over Robert Darius like a dark cloud. The company's strategy had been clear: slow Robert's momentum, try to halt Vanguard Air's rise before it could reach its peak. But Robert wasn't so easily caught in their trap. His legal team, a finely tuned machine led by Samuel Blackwell, had already anticipated every move the airline would make. The moment the lawsuit landed, Robert had responded with swift, decisive action. In a matter of days, Robert's legal team had uncovered more than just corporate misdeeds. They had unearthed a disturbing trail of illegal tactics designed not just to suppress competition, but to systematically crush anyone who dared to challenge the established order. A trove of confidential documents, intercepted communications, and insider testimonies painted a damning picture of collusion between the former airline and corporate giants in other industries. As the news broke, the narrative took a sudden, dramatic turn. The once proud airline, the behemoth that had been the face of luxury travel, now found itself on the defensive. Headlines screamed of corporate manipulation, bribery, and deceit. What had been an innocuous lawsuit in the eyes of the public now seemed like a desperate, last-ditch effort by a failing company to hold on to its fading power. Robert's name, meanwhile, began to shine brighter. Vanguard Air, his new airline that was founded on principles of fairness and transparency, was now seen as the beacon of change. But as the media storm gathered momentum, a darker undercurrent began to form. Robert had always known that power, once gained, was never easily relinquished. Some of the former airline's board members, once allies in Robert's mission for corporate reform, had begun to panic. The collapse of their empire was imminent, and with it, their influence. They feared being left in the shadows, their positions of power eroded by Robert's unstoppable rise. Desperation set in. In private meetings, whispers of betrayal began to circulate. The very men who had once supported Robert's vision were now feeding misinformation to the press. Subtle leaks started to appear, innuendos about Vanguard Air's operations, rumors of financial instability, suggestions that Robert's plans were not as flawless as they appeared. These men, hidden in the shadows of their former alliance, hoped to create doubt. They believed that if they could undermine Robert's credibility, they could regain control of the narrative. But Robert wasn't caught off guard. As soon as he caught wind of the betrayals, he moved with the precision of a chess master. His team was already investigating the leaks, tracing every piece of misinformation back to its source. The evidence of betrayal came swiftly, and it wasn't just a few whispers, it was a full-blown conspiracy. In a tense meeting with his closest advisors, Robert looked at Samuel Blackwell, his trusted confidant, and nodded. "It's time to expose them," he said, his voice cold but calm. Samuel didn't need to ask for details. He had been with Robert long enough to understand. Robert had already prepared the media for a new angle to the story, one that would shine a light on the betrayal from within. The next morning, the media landscape shifted once again. Robert Darius, always a step ahead, unleashed a series of revelations. In a press conference that sent shockwaves through the corporate world, he revealed the names of the board members who had conspired against him. Their covert efforts to sabotage Vanguard Air were laid bare for the world to see. Documents, emails, even secret audio recordings, the evidence was irrefutable. The former airline's board members were stunned. They had thought they could act in the shadows, pulling the strings without anyone noticing. But Robert's preparation had been meticulous. His exposure of their treachery was not just a victory, it was a devastating blow to their power. The betrayal had been revealed for all to see, and now those responsible would face the consequences. Robert had anticipated every move, even the betrayals from within. The public's eyes were glued to the television screens, a hushed tension spreading across living rooms and offices nationwide. It wasn't just another corporate scandal. It was the clash of two worlds, and Robert Darius had become the face of a movement that would forever change the airline industry. The last few months had been a whirlwind. The legal battles, the media frenzy, and the constant scrutiny had not deterred him. Instead, they had only fueled his resolve to dismantle an industry built on discrimination, elitism, and exploitation. Robert stood at the front of the room, watching the final preparations for the launch of Vanguard Air, his new airline, unfold before him. The mood was electric with anticipation, not just among the executives and investors, but among the employees who had come from every corner of the industry. They were here for more than just a paycheck. They were here to be part of something bigger, something that would reshape an industry that had long been tainted by the kind of toxic practices Robert had made his mission to eradicate. As the first flight took off, the sound of the engines roaring through the crisp morning air, Robert could feel a sense of victory settling in. It wasn't just the success of the airline, it was the fact that this was a direct answer to everything that had happened, everything that had been done to his grandson, Malik. The boy had stood his ground in the face of injustice, his quiet strength becoming the symbol of resilience and determination that had rallied millions behind him. Malik, still young but far beyond his years in wisdom, stood beside his grandfather, his expression calm but unwavering. The media had fallen in love with him, his quiet resolve, his ability to stand firm against the world. He had gone from a boy who had been humiliated by a flight attendant to a voice for a movement that championed justice, equality, and respect. And now, as he watched the plane take flight, he could feel the weight of the moment. It wasn't just a victory for his family. It was a victory for every passenger who had ever felt less than because of their background, their status, or their appearance. As the plane ascended into the sky, Malik's mind raced, his thoughts not on the cheers from the crowd but on the future. The future of the airline, yes, but more importantly, the future of the world he was helping to shape. The voices that had once been drowned out by the clamor of the privileged and powerful were now being heard. The tides had shifted, and it was clear that nothing would be the same again. The day was unfolding like a dream for Robert, but even he knew that this was just the beginning. The airline's first year of operations had exceeded all expectations, both financially and culturally. They were showing the world that fairness and profitability could go hand in hand. And yet Robert's mind never stopped working. There were still other industries to reform, other systems to dismantle. This was just one battle in a much larger war against the entrenched powers of inequality and greed. Standing next to Robert, Malik could feel the quiet pride emanating from his grandfather, but he also sensed the anticipation for what was to come. Robert had always been a man of action, and as much as he had achieved, he knew the journey wasn't over. "Grandpa," Malik said softly, his gaze focused on the horizon. "We did it." Robert's hand rested on the boy's shoulder, a firm but gentle reminder of the bond they shared and the battles they had fought together. He had always seen something special in Malik, something that would make him a force to be reckoned with. But even he couldn't have predicted the quiet revolution that Malik had sparked, how a single boy's humiliation could shift the balance of power in an entire industry. "We did," Robert agreed, his voice steady but filled with pride. "But remember, Malik, this isn't just about winning. It's about changing the world, and that's something we've only just begun." The press had painted Malik as a hero, and Robert as a visionary. But they both knew the true victory was the future that lay ahead, one where children like Malik would no longer have to endure the injustice he had faced. It wasn't just about fixing a broken system, it was about creating a new one built on respect, equality, and integrity. As they watched Vanguard Air soar through the sky, Robert and Malik stood side by side, knowing that their fight had only just begun. There would be more battles, more obstacles to overcome, but for now, they had secured a victory that had the power to change not just an industry, but the world. The future had been secured, and it was built on justice, fairness, and unwavering resolve. He thought he could get away with it, but justice came from the highest office. If you stand for dignity, strength, and accountability, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to highlight issues of discrimination and the impact of prejudice in everyday interactions. Its purpose is to raise awareness, promote empathy, and encourage important conversations about respect, justice, and equality in all environments.